So we're going to dive straight into our questions, and we're going to start with you, Caitlin. Can you just share a story about a moment or an experience that first sparked your interest in civic engagement, either as a student or as a community leader?
So I think that a lot of my civic engagement starts with my role as a student neighbourhood ambassador with Manchester Student Homes. So yeah, I would like to preface that this was a paid role that was given to me by the university, and it was sort of a once a week thing. Once or twice a week I went out door knocking in student areas and was providing sort of free housing advice and support and things like that. Yeah, so I think that really put into perspective kind of understanding the student neighborhood, kind of seeing it from a different way, because when you're sort of tasked with going out and, maybe delivering a specific message each week, you sort of perceive the neighborhood in a different way. And, I feel really lucky to have been able to speak to students, about their day-to-day experiences and any sort of problems that they were having with their landlord and things like that. And kind of, I was able to see snippets of students' lives. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And yeah, it just sort of opened my eyes to the different challenges being faced by students, and actually the importance of sort of focusing on neighbourhoods and living conditions for students, and how much that really affects their experience of university as a whole. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's where I started.
Amazing. I just want to touch briefly on the fact that you explained that it is a paid role. And I think that's so interesting because it's so important to value students' time and
Yeah.
value their expertise and skills. And I think by paying a student to do this kind of civic work is so important because it just demonstrates that you are an essential member of the community and you should have value attached to your skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so this was a pilot role as well. So the reason that they wanted to start a student neighborhood ambassador role was to kind of be able to get students in who had experience living in the neighborhood sort of more on a level with, the doors that they were knocking on. Sometimes I'd knock on someone's door and I'd start my whole script and everything, and I'd look up and I'd realize it's one of my friends. And, just the amount of chats that I've had with people that have been very casual and have allowed students to open up. I think, yeah, like you say, it is really important to sort of actually value what that is lived experience, really. And I think that lived experience is, a huge part of universities kind of expanding their civic engagement and everything like that. So yeah, valuing students' time is really important because, we don't have a lot of it. So yeah.
Thank you. So, Mems, coming to you, how was your time as a student, or now in your role at Sheffield University, shaped your understanding of what it means to belong to a community?
So when I studied at the University of Warwick, I was really involved in increasing voter engagement from people with marginalised backgrounds, particularly those from racialised groups. That experience in itself was the opening to my interest in civic engagement generally. But again, the bigger question of how do we try and get different voices into that space? Post that then led me down a career working in policy, working with representatives, trying to tackle that question. So my role at the University of Sheffield Students' Union, I'm the Director of Student Influence. My role is to empower students to feel like that they can make change at a regional and national level. And this theme of belonging is really important. So in Sheffield, we've got over 60,000 students across the city. Many choose to stay here after they graduate because, number one, it's a fantastic city to live in, but also it's very welcoming. They make them feel like they belong. And again, give them the skills to understand all of the different ways students and then as residents that they can get involved in just things that happen outside of their day-to-day life. So we at the Students' Union try and pride ourselves in the work that we do with our community. So one of the programs that we currently lead on is called ChangeLab, where students work with charities, community organisations within the city of Sheffield to essentially deal with societal problems. By even doing that piece of work, students feel like they belong much more than they would have done at the beginning of the programme. And again, being part of a city that wants to be open and welcoming is the key to that.
Hearing you speak about that concept of belonging is really important. I think is something that we've been putting a lot of work into thinking about the civic university movement. What does belonging actually mean to you in the context of university life and the places that students and staff and universities call home?
It's a really good question. I would say after the pandemic, there's been this really weird lull period of loneliness across, again, institutions. And we as a students' union see us in tackling that through our society groups, through our volunteering programs, and making them feel like they have a home away from home, which is really important. And again, just with the rise of technology, so again, some lectures can be fully virtual. Some students may not even come to campus as they did historically before. So when they are here, we have to ask the questions of how do we make them feel at home? And again, it's little things just about how do we pitch events? What language do we use? How do we make sure that faculties have that sense of belonging? Is that through a uniform colour? Is that through a mascot? Again, we always love a period in which we do our sporting events, because those are where these communities are built and lifelong friendships are also made. So I would say it's a blend of all of those things, of making them feel like when they are at campus, they've got places that are accessible, understanding, but give them those opportunities to find other people that have shared interest and common ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I think inclusivity is such a key ingredient to creating that sense of belonging, isn't it? So, Caitlin, in your experience, what do you think are the key ingredients that help universities create those genuinely inclusive civic opportunities for students from all backgrounds?
So I think that I would actually maybe even extend it to long-term residents as well. If we're kind of going sort of between that relationship between university and local areas, and that kind of being, an important focus of the Civic. Mems touched on sort of the use of language and stuff and inclusivity. I think as universities need to be more conscious of their framing in how they talk about local areas. To provide a Manchester example, Fallowfield is one of the main sort of student areas. It's in South Manchester. And there is this sort of framing that that's a student area, and the university uses language that sort of makes students feel like, this is only an area for students and their long-term residents don't exist in Fallowfield, which is just absolutely not true. So I think that one of the key ingredients would be more conscious and more inclusive language that doesn't separate student as, a kind of, an entirely separate category, but they are sort of involved and they are residents as well. And there's many things in the community that they can be involved with. But it's interesting what Mem was saying about the ChangeLab project, because I think that is, that sounds like a really key ingredient that other places could use, because, if you're sort of tackling that sort of loneliness and separation that I think a lot of people of my generation and, feel within their local community, there isn't that, as much of a sense of community. Working with local charities and also local groups is such a good way to start. And I think the universities should start by understanding what local groups there are in the areas that students live in, and how they can collaborate with them and, potentially provide funding for different projects, because, they are the ones that kind of maintain the well-being of students in that community. They do litter picks every Saturday and things like that. Students can get involved with that and they can feel much more of a sense of belonging, I think. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Caitlin. And Mems, from your perspective, how do you think that universities can ensure that civic experiences are accessible and meaningful for all of those, everyone that might have felt excluded from such opportunities in the past, perhaps?
I would say being led by the data. So I think universities need to better understand that the population they're trying to engage with, and many don't have a sufficient level of, I would say, rich data to understand some of those conundrums. So I would say, for example, let's talk about international students. So again, they contribute a lot of money to the city of Sheffield, to this university. And many of them, when they do come to study, feel like they can't essentially be part of these civic engagement programs. What we need to do is demystify that. And that's by, again, ensuring we have enough data to understand why they feel uncomfortable with it, but also, again, empower them to feel that they are part of this community. So it's first of all doing that data, having a better understanding of some of their problems. Secondly, I would say, again, it's a visibility point. Universities do such great work, but again, I'm not sure why we don't shout about it from the roofs. Again, ensuring that we're pitching this at the correct level of those groups. Do they understand this work's probably already going on? And do they know how to actually engage? So we have to then think about what is the time of those meetings? Where is it located? Is there a cost of travel to actually engage? All of the things that, again, people may not consider. Like, if we're trying to engage with these groups, some of them have caring, parental responsibility. The designing of all of these things needs to be taken at the start of planning. And again, that evaluation needs to happen towards the end to say, okay, we've done this, but we haven't actually been able to engage with this group. How about we work with some social action programs or partners that have the access to them and signpost our work a bit clearer to them? So I would say, just to kind of round up, it would be that data and design of those questions. And second, again, it's about the framing of those events and those spaces. And then thirdly, it's to shout about our work and be a bit more visible.
I love that so much. We've talked endlessly about measurements, and lots of civic colleagues are very confused about how do you measure a civic project? How do you demonstrate work? So that's such an amazing example, Mems, of using data to explain something, interpreting it to demonstrate this is a barrier and then this is what I've done to remove that barrier. That's such an amazing example. And I think that people in the civic space need to use numbers in a way that supports them and not be frightened of numbers.
Indeed. And again, it tells us a story that sometimes we tend to forget, and it can be a different type of process. So when we, for example, developed our strategy, we used the theory of change. And I love that strategy because, again, it shows that by the time we get to the end point, we can also actually admit that the approach didn't work. It didn't do what we were supposed to. And we can go back to the drawing board. That wasn't a failure. It was, again, a level of transparency and accountability that I think a lot of civic engagement models need to really take ownership around of. It's not a telling off that you haven't done something, but it just says you may need to do it differently in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And being brave enough to admit when things have gone wrong and understanding the narrative of when something went wrong. So another one of our waypoints is learning from evidence and experience. And I do totally agree with you that I think sometimes in the civic space, people are frightened to say this didn't work because of the repercussions. Tell me a little bit about how do you get so brave? How are you okay with saying that didn't work?
So I would say for staff, it's creating networks in which they can be quite open and honest and rant to other colleagues that have done it before or are trying to do it. So creating communities of practice to highlight the good work, but also things that haven't gone so well, I think is really important. I can't emphasize it enough that sometimes those that are doing the work just need that space to say, and that's really healthy. So I would say that's definitely a tip. And secondly, I would say it's being forward thinking. A lot of our strategies think that our outputs have to be done and be neatly packaged within a 3 to 6 to 12-month framework, which again, maybe it's not the case. We've got a lot of different things happening across society, which may change the responses or change the attitudes of our work. And we need to be really cognizant of that as well, of that the world is a very fast moving place at the moment. And it actually just may mean that our outcomes are slightly different. So I would say those two things of developing a shared sense of community, a community of practice, and secondly, being really aware and cognizant of the fact that the world is very much changing. And that will mean the work that we do has to be very reliant on the people that are willing to share those experiences.
Yeah, those brave voices that are ready to say this didn't work. You can learn from my mistakes. You can start where I ended and pick this up and take it further. Yeah, it's so powerful, definitely. Okay, so we're going to move on to citizenship. So this is a question for both of you. Why do you think it's important for students to learn and practice active citizenship as part of their university experience? Caitlin, do you want to jump in on that?
It's so important for students to, practice their active citizenship because, I mean, it should be normalized. And I think that it's not normalized now. It seems like kind of an extra step. But also, there needs to be sort of some providing of opportunities for people to experience active citizenship, and I think that the universities have a role to play in that. So kind of giving one example that we've had here, Manchester Student Homes has collaborated with Withington Civic Society and kind of local members to just do a community curry night. So we had one a couple of years ago, we just had another one recently. What was really great though is we had curry night 2 weeks ago, and then just last week we had a pizza night at a different venue, local venue. But it was really great to kind of have one consecutively after the other, because you left the curry night kind of thinking, oh, that was really great. We should be doing this more often. And then, jump to next week and you've got that again. And, what that was just sort of students coming together over kind of free food. It's always great to get some free dinner, and then speaking to, local members of the community. We've got a lot of older residents in our area as well. We also did like a kind of group, like a quiz sort of thing, which was really nice. And I think like it's important for students to kind of have that experience, because it does just sort of broaden their understanding of where they live, and it kind of comes back to this thing of belonging. I think if you're just going straight from your house to uni, to your uni to house every day, and not experiencing any other sort of third space within your local community, it's not, I think that you don't really get that same sense of belonging, and it can be quite isolating. And also it does lead to, as I've seen in some inquiry projects I've been involved with, it can lead to different social problems and a lot of tension between students and longer term residents when they don't have any of those convening spaces that they share together. There is a kind of villainizing that goes on, and students, I think, do get like a bad end of the stick on that, because it's it's hard to kind of navigate that relationship when there aren't enough convening spaces and there aren't enough sort of active opportunities for people to get involved. But yeah, I think it is, worth sort of being conscious of the time that students have, and if there are ways and more opportunities that can be created to sort of value students' time and their expertise as well. So yeah, I mean, it's important for many reasons, to be honest. But yeah.
Amazing. And Mems, what's your perspective on it? Why do you think it is so important to have that citizenship opportunity?
Yeah. So with active citizenship, I can't emphasize how important it is for students, not just, again, the fact that they are paying a lot of money to study, but also studying and being part of a university means that they're part of a wider community, or part of a wider region of change. So again, I would kind of go back to the point that it empowers social change. Students have historically been at the forefront of a lot of social movements, from climate change to equality campaigns. And here again at Sheffield Students' Union, we're really proud to empower students from having a drop-in session with local MPs. So if students are having issues, they can go directly to their MPs, and actually once they graduate, they feel comfortable hope to do that again. And we also just did our Sheffield Student Assembly, where we had Oliver Coppard and again Abdesam Mohammed come to speak to students about the issues impacting them around housing and transport, nighttime safety. These are themes that are going to follow them once they do graduate. So making sure they feel confident to interact in those spaces is really important. I guess the second thing, again, is really touching on what Caitlin said. Again, it promotes the sense of belonging and social connection, which is really important in this time and space where loneliness is an issue, where people feel there's a problem bigger than themselves and they have a shared responsibility to deal with many issues. So I think that's a really key thing. And quite frankly, it just strengthens democracy by students engaging in dialogue and being able to vote in local elections, in general elections. They feel like they have a voice, and that is really important. And again, these are the lessons that they don't stop using once they graduate. They then take this on into different spheres of their life. And again, it also helps them with transferable skills, how to disagree, how to essentially build campaigns, and again, make them feel like their voice is really important and is part of this wider change.
Caitlin, so we've talked loads. Mem's touched on so many different examples of practical skills that her students gain from engaging in her civic projects. Can you talk to me about some of the practical skills that you can reflect on, that you gained from doing those civic projects out in the community?
Yeah, so some practical skills I feel like I've developed through kind of my work with Manchester Student Homes, mainly going outdoor knocking, is that I feel like I've been able to build more confidence in advocacy. So that's for, other people, other students, as well as myself. And it's that sort of learning that you get on the doorstep, speaking to someone about, an issue they might be facing with their landlord. Oftentimes it's kind of that unresponsiveness that they're getting, doing that sort of firsthand advocacy for that person and then relaying it back to the team and kind of dealing with those problems. I feel like that is definitely a transferable skill. And also, I think it kind of goes back to this thing of active citizenship as well, because through kind of learning how the system works a little bit and kind of that confidence I've built with navigating the housing system, I feel like I've been able to contribute more to things like the Greater Manchester Tenants Union, so that we've also got a student renters union, and that's directly connected to the student union as well. So I think that is something that I wish a lot more students could build more confidence in, is actually, reaching out to these support services and being empowered tenants as well, not taking any crap from landlords, because it's, they constantly, I feel that students are taken advantage of in the housing system. But if people can kind of understand that they can take them on and kind of be empowered in their voice, then we could get so much further with things. So I think that that's a transferable skill, is sort of understanding advocacy a bit more, less than in school, where you might have a history lesson and learn about a certain historical injustice and things like that. And also what Mem said about students being part of those changes and things like that. And whilst that's really important to learn about, I think it's really interesting going from learning about that in a sort of more abstract and secondary sense, to actually understanding the problems that students are facing in our community right now, and how that can also be connected to where the university can help, and where the student union and the tenants unions can link to that as well. So yeah, I think that's a practical skill I've learned.
Yeah, and I love that it's a life skill, isn't it? It's been able to take a problem, understand that you have the responsibility to support somebody and the skills, and take that forward. That's applicable in every area of people's lives, definitely. And I think it isn't something necessarily that you can pick up in a classroom. Someone could teach you, this is what it feels like to be empowered, but to go out and do that stuff, it's so powerful, especially to do it for somebody else. I think that's a big key about creating that sense of belonging in a community, having a level of responsibility, and understanding that students do have the abilities and skills and knowledge and experience to be able to advocate for others. So, what advice would you give to universities on connecting academic learning with real-world community priorities to cultivate active, confident citizens?
The advice that I would give is ensuring there are touch points throughout the year in which they can translate their work into clear objectives and, again, practical outcomes. It's really, again, easy for academics, I think, to get really into that theory and think about those really big questions. But again, what are those touch points? And here at the University of Sheffield, what we have are essentially those where we talk about the work that we are doing, we are showcasing it, and we kind of invite academics and those working in different faculties and schools to see, is there any sort of way in which you can contribute to this? And what you get then are a group of energized students, but also, again, what we get from you is that information, that theory to shape our work. So I would say it's being able to kind of, again, take a step back from that bigger picture and, again, look at how do we provide some really practical, even small bite-sized advice to start testing some of these ideas. And I totally really appreciate that's hard to do. And again, when they are so busy and there are so many different competing priorities, but it goes back to that data question of, if we already acknowledge and recognize that students or people from minority groups are not included in some of that theory, that then should be a way in which you have those checkpoints to see that, and just to be able to have honest conversations as well. But again, my advice is to, reach out. People are always happy to speak about their work, but also, actually, are there any other groups that you don't know about? And just scheduling time for coffees and trying to, again, just doing that networking, but in that space where you are networking with someone that may not really understand your work, but that's the fun in it. You translate that in a way in which those groups may understand. So again, it's being more visible, not feeling, again, scared to be doing outreach, and again, just making sure that you have those touch points to review all of those things.
But just a bit of a random question for you, Mems. Do you think that student unions are kind of more experienced in it? They understand the provision of it a little bit more. Is that something fair to say from your perspective?
100%. I think we're much more agile, we're less clunky, we're able to be a bit more responsive. The way in which our year works is we are able to just think about welcome week, so that's freshers, collect the data from there, think about the work that we need to do, and again, have it based more on themes and be a bit more responsive. And just the fact that we have so many students that are engaged with our work, as I said, either through sports, through volunteering, through advocacy, through council, through students running in elections. We've just got a breadth of students. So again, my background was working in the civil service before this. I was in the Department for Education. And I guess a surprise for me was how much universities across the sector don't utilise student unions. We're a great conduit to work directly with partners at the university and with students. And what we've definitely seen is that our advocacy strategies, especially at the University of Sheffield, aren't being plucked out of thin air. They're really based on what are students thinking, what are they experiencing, what, again, activities or what events or what spaces do we need to create? And then what we should be doing or what we are doing is sharing that information with the university so they can do the same thing. So, yeah, I definitely think so because, again, student unions tend to be a bit smaller. Most of the staff that have worked here, we have a very long-term serving amounts of staff that have seen universities and unions work in different ways as well. So we've got a lot of organisational knowledge. And yeah, we're just a really exciting place to work for and be, really. There's always going to be a different set of students each year and they all bring in their own flavour, their own experiences. And we as a union are so equipped to respond to that. And definitely will say on that civic sense, this is the first year that the University of Sheffield Students' Union has really been toying with the idea of how do we ensure that students' voices are included in the agenda. So as I said, little things such as the MP drop-in session or even saying to students, you're having an issue about housing, we can support you with this, but also have you considered any other charities within the city? So again, we try and do that through our student advice centre. So students that are having issues with anything relating to academic issues, financial issues and housing issues, they're able to speak to one of our 5 advisors and we're able then to provide that response. But sometimes our responses are, we can only help you till this point, but have you considered X, Y, and Z? That, in my view, is civic work, and that's really important civic work. For example, we just had our housing fair. We know that students may struggle to find housemates. Okay, they found the house, but we also know that there's the Renters' Rights Bill that's being enacted on the 1st of May. Do students know about those wider civic responsibilities and how they will change their contracts? So it's little things like that, and I wouldn't say little, actually. There are big things like that that we're essentially trying to handle in the union, but definitely would want to see much more engagement with universities across the sector on things that we are able to support with. And again, and my last point on this is we're really proud of our diversity. We have a really broad range of students. You know, when I walk around our building, I see people from all corners of the world and all have such different lived experiences. We should be utilising that, and that should be reflected in the work that the university does. But also, again, going back to the point of why don't we scream about this more? Why don't we champion this? And again, I think that's why many students choose to stay in the city of Sheffield, because it is so diverse, it is so welcoming, and that's something we should definitely treasure.
Just to segue nicely into our next question, you mentioned there about how do you really make sure we've got inclusive spaces for people with different lived experiences, and looking at your student body as such a diverse range of people from different backgrounds. How do we actually approach building trust and sharing leadership across that kind of diversity and include people with different lived experiences or areas of expertise in our civic work?
I would definitely say it's a lot of reflecting of when organisations and groups have not got it right and being able to say we did not get it right. And through either training or just, again, providing spaces, we've thought about it and we want to do it differently. I think, again, having a humbleness is really important. And again, even though those working in the space have that technical experience, there's certain things that people with lived experience may be able to say or share that just carries a bit more legitimacy. Again, it's the blend of understanding of when things didn't go right, saying it didn't go right, so we're asking X, Y, and Z, but also, again, acknowledging one's privilege when they enter certain spaces to say, I've studied X, Y, and Z, I've recommended X, Y, and Z, but you are living in it. What are your views about this? And testing those, ideas. Again, it's creating a level playing field as well. And I think when some people think that, they mean that it's kind of like lowering the bar, but that's not the case. It's, again, as I said, it's little things about the logistics and the technicalities of when an event is run, where it's run, and I think who you're speaking to, but it does require some different voices in that space. So one of the areas that I'm really keen on addressing, and again, I think it's about governance structures. I think governance structures should reflect the population that they're trying to represent and support. If you are developing a youth engagement strategy but have not spoken to any young people, I'm probably not going to think it's the most engaged and in tune strategy. And again, it's just because you haven't engaged the stakeholder that you're trying to support. So that would be the same thing for any governance structure of, are governance structures a bit too rigid? Are they flexible enough where they can co-opt people into those spaces? And again, like, we have to think about who's sitting in those rooms. Being a student in 2025 is very different to being a student even in 2020. Even again in 2005, each year, every cohort has a different thing that, again, the cohort before them didn't have to deal with. And where we lose students and people from certain backgrounds is when we try again to speak as authority, but also not recognizing that there may be some nuances there and there may be some differences there. So again, it's really shifting away from this one size fits all approach and being happy to tailor things as you go along.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mems. And that was making me reflect on one of the bits of advice that we give to universities, because I think there's a natural tendency as a university to say, we're kind of big, powerful players in this place. We collect and enhance people's knowledge. We've got a lot to share, and maybe coming with predefined agendas to some of these civic activities, when actually it's about asking the questions of what can we support you with, not here's what we think you should be doing, here's all the solutions. It's actually maybe flipping the script and starting from what do you need support with and starting there as an approach. So yeah, that's really interesting. Kayla, do you have any thoughts on this area about how we kind of build trust and share leadership across diverse groups, or bring in people with different types of lived experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think sort of whilst you were both speaking, I was thinking about, when you kind of look at if you're framing universities as having a lot of institutional weight and being anchor institutions, things like that, they're sort of the space that they provide for accountability is kind of, it needs to match that. And I think that what definitely in my experience with University of Manchester as an institution, how they've navigated some of the problems that are being faced in student neighbourhoods, there is a total lack of accountability, and they haven't shown up for conversations that they are inherently part of, and to be honest, have kind of been the key driver of those problems being faced. So, the University of Manchester is the biggest landlord in Manchester, so they need to be leading by example in how they navigate that space and the housing market and how that impacts students on a day-to-day level. But yeah, I think sort of, if you're going to say that universities have this much institutional capacity and this much power, they need to have, they need to match that with having accountability and kind of being involved in spaces. I think being involved in spaces, but being careful about how they navigate those spaces, because obviously there is quite a power imbalance a lot of the time. And sort of how having kind of maybe, senior members of the university can, with community members in the same room, sort of what that looks like and how that can cause friction. Yeah, but then actually kind of looking at different research projects and funding different research projects about lived experience and sort of looking at the data to see what problems are being faced and how the university can do better. Actually, if, universities were be able to provide sort of more funding for these projects or just more recognition of them, I think we could get a lot further, because, it's things like, so I've been involved in the Fallowfield Collective Inquiry, and we've done a series of different forms of data collection, so co-created workshops and walking methodologies as well. We've done different walks around Fallowfield, but also sort of participatory systems mapping. So we've kind of looked all together, and so this is community members, student leaders, and just students themselves. And we've kind of examined what are the push-pull factors to the neighbourhood. And then we've taken all this data and we've given some policy recommendations, but we're just having a little bit of trouble now in the rollout of this data. So actually trying to make plans with, senior members of the team to sit down and have a look at some of this data. It's been, presented to different people, but there is just a little bit of trouble of actually getting this on the agenda. But people kind of go and say, they love data and everything like that, but actually, yeah, it seems like we're just having a bit of trouble now navigating who do we speak to and what sort of change can be made. And like Mem said, every single year things change and things like that. And we've got upcoming things happening in Manchester, such as the new redevelopment in Fallowfield that's going to rise costs from £110 a week for one room to £235 a week. So this is a huge concern for students and long-term residents in the area because of how this is going to affect the renting market. And we just don't feel, within the community that there is enough conversations being had with senior members at the university. And I've got a few friends who are in the student union executive team. They do have a little bit more influence when it comes to that. And I would like to reiterate Mems's point about student unions being, like, I would say, the absolute centre point of civic participation activity at the university. But even then, I know that they've gotten in meetings with senior membership leaders and have been a little bit dismissed because they're sort of like, well, it's expensive to build housing. So, there's such a lack of accountability there. But I think kind of going back to what Mem said about student unions being, I think, a key answer to a lot of this. If you think about how much they do and actually how much democratic participation that they encourage through students, that would be such a great starting point. And making sure that they are kind of properly embedded in the institution is really important.
Yeah. So one of our waypoints is embedding Civic as core, as a core mission for the university. And I think the things that both of you have raised is that Civic is core to a student union, and then that helps inform decisions that are made. It helps data get into the right hands because it is a part of a senior leader's role. It is part of everybody's role to be civic if you are a civic university. And we are, really pushing forward with that message that it needs to be embedded in every area, from procurement to estates, things like housing for your students. If you have civic embedded throughout every single element of everything that you operate within, then it will transform the way that you work and who you work with and how you work with those people. And I think it will bring together all of those ideas that you've shared if you embed it as your true core mission. Adam, have you got any more questions?
Well, I just wanted to add on that. I think when Caitlin was speaking there, it made me think of another waypoint in our field guide, which is balancing hyperlocal concerns with regional strategic partnerships as part of a civic approach. And I think universities have often battled with this. Do we have to pick between our civic approaches about the really hyperlocal issues that matter to communities on the ground, the rental situation that you raised there, Caitlin, a really hyperlocal example of what a university could do if it kind of really tackled that problem, but also balancing that with wider regional civic approaches. So working with the mayor's office on the kind of the whole population in the region or a specific area, and getting that balance right. Civic is about all those different dimensions. It's about working really closely with neighbourhoods, with communities, but it's also about having strategic relationships with local authorities, with mayor's officers, and with national policymaking as well. So there is a balance to be had here with how universities consider and act on all of those things.
So finally, it'd be great to hear from both of you about thinking about the communities that you work within. What do you want them to remember about the impact of students and universities? If you could talk to a community member, what would you hope that they would say about your students?
Okay, I'll go first. I think that I would like to just, I guess keep it simple in the way I'd like to I'd like, local community members to feel that students were also part of that local community, and that they're not separate, and that they have kind and caring neighbours. Definitely in the events that we've had recently with the Lady Barn Community Curry Night, I know that feeling was definitely felt. Everyone just sort of had a name tag and was going around, and everyone was mixing up who they were talking to. I think that was just such a lovely, I think, simple feeling, for students and for longer term residents there, that they have people in their community who care. And I think that, that would just be a nice thing that I'd like, people in the local community to remember, and just sort of, I guess, how that can evoke a sense of the fact that the university, wants to be on your side, and that we can sort of work together if we, properly engage with and things like that. But, I love going to kind of local places around here, such as Withington Baths, which is this is a community-led gym and leisure centre. And all the profits from membership goes back into the community. It's such a great feeling going there and seeing little kids coming out the swimming pool. It might be some of their first swimming lessons, and you look to the side and there's like an over 65 sit down Pilates session and things like that. That sort of feeling, there's no way to sort of fabricate that, really. All that is just kind of stepping out in your community and getting involved and feeling like you're part of a place, you're not just part of a university. And I think that I would like sort of, communities to sort of recognize students as residents. And, there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of build up that participation a little bit more. But yeah, a lot of it is quite organic, I think, as well.
Mems, how about you? What do you want your community to think about your students?
I would want them to think of the impacts that they bring to the city. And it's always so clear because when they're not here, local businesses definitely are like, gosh, when are they coming back? And so are taxi services. And so are, again, just small shops and eateries. I just want them to acknowledge it, but also then appreciate it. And I think actually the appreciation is more for representatives to understand the energy and enthusiasm students bring to a student city like Sheffield. And, we don't only want to hear about the bad things, the noise complaints. We want to talk about then the students that are volunteering in the city or, again, doing some really amazing and creative work. And also to recognise that many of them will possibly be their neighbours. So again, is understanding that pipeline of actually we need to treat them as citizens and be open to them because again, there's a chance that they're going to be here for a really long time. So I would say that a lot of the problems and experiences that students and local residents have, while they're not mutually exclusive, there's a lot of crossover. So again, the cost of living issue, we know that this impacts a lot of people across the city of Sheffield. It also impacts students. The housing quality impacts a lot of residents across the region and also impacts students. So it's finding that commonality and empathizing of what do we have in common as opposed to what do we not have in common. I know the rhetoric, especially just around students, is sometimes just a bit outdated. Students are also mature students. They're sometimes PhD holders. Some of them are international. Some of them, again, are parents. There is this ideal type of what a student is. And I sometimes think that stereotype hasn't been updated. So again, it's just recognizing that people that choose to study and learn new things, they're doing that in totally different ways. And again, we have commuter students as well. So there's a plethora of students and what they contribute to the city. And I guess what I would ask for citizens to do is acknowledge that, appreciate it, but also recognize there's a lot of similarities and joint ground, and to put pressure on representatives that seek to divide to talk about the hope that we can build together. So again, we've got local council elections coming up and we want students to be registered. We want them to know where the local, voting booth is. We want them to know who is running. We want them to read their manifestos. And as I said, because we already do elections every year, students are able to do that. So I also want citizens to treat students like adults, which they are. And again, feel not like they can't shy away from having really hard discussions with them and involving them in really important democratic exercises such as elections.
Yeah. I think you've both brought such fantastic ideas. You've brought just a really great element to it. And I'm so pleased that we're able to share so much about students within our Civic Field Guide as well. Like you said, Mems, it's so important if we're going to talk about a group of people, then we need to make sure that we're representing voices of people who are experts in that area. And I would say both of you guys have really brought that civic student experience to life. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you both.
No worries. Thank you so much for having us.